You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 87 for June 22nd, 2016. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about health and safety, using our own stories and experiences from the field, which may or may not include stories of alligators, wild boars, giant mosquitoes, fire ants, and extreme heat. And also, just a side note, we had some serious recording issues right at the start of this episode, so we had to try something we'd never done before, which, of course, always goes well the first time. I've managed to edit this thing within an inch of his life, and it sounds okay, but there are some auditory artifacts still remaining, so apologies for that. If you'd like to fix those problems, then please go over to the APN website and donate to us so we can upgrade our system. So go mix up your DEET and sunscreen paste, because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are Doug in Scotland.
Hello.
And Bill in Arizona.
Good morning.
All right, so today we're going to talk about health and safety issues. I think when we went to record this last time, Doug mentioned that, didn't we just talk about this? But it was like back on, I don't know, episode 5 or something like that. So it's like 3 years ago. So I think we're due for a health and safety conversation, especially with the weather starting to kick up in a lot of different areas. I mean, some people are going to be saying it's already been 100 degrees here for a long time. So, yeah, Bill, we'll get to you in a minute. So what we plan to talk about today, now whether or not we get to all this remains to be seen. Maybe we'll do another episode midsummer or something like that. But we plan to talk about dehydration, a lot of insect stuff, bug repellent, some different viruses and things like that you could be exposed to, sun exposure issues, different kinds of UVA, UVB, sunscreen, stuff like that, and some stuff you can do to sort of mitigate even needing sunscreen, things like that. And then we'll, hopefully in the second segment, we'll make it to insects. We'll talk about the Zika virus a little bit. We'll talk about ticks. We'll talk about ants, and then animals. We'll bring those up. Got a lot of different animals to mention and talk about depending on what part of the country you live in. And then for the third segment, I've got on the slate some other issues such as silicosis, valley fever, hantavirus, dealing with rusty metal. If you ever work around mine sites or anything with like, old cans and stuff like that, you've got to worry about rusty metal. So, trash dumps that smell funny, stuff like that. I mean, I remember being on a mine site that, clearly smelled like almonds, which usually means cyanide. So anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about. But let's go right into dehydration, since that's becoming a big one. And Bill works and lives in Arizona, and it's starting to get super hot down there, I'd imagine. So, Bill, what you got to say about dehydration?
Starting to get super hot. It's crazy because every winter I always forget that I'm in the desert while I'm, hanging out and doing preposterous stuff that other people don't get to do in the winter, hiking, camping with my family in November, with them wearing shorts and stuff like that, swimming for Easter. We always forget that this day is going to come where it's like, 115 outside, and my air conditioning bill is astronomical. But, yeah, dehydration is like one of the things that I always am worried about when I'm with my kids, hanging out and them going to school and playing outside, but especially when I'm with crews. So the one thing that you need to know about dehydration is that if you're starting to feel any kind of physical effects at all, dizziness, maybe headache, anything else like that, that's you need to start taking precautions like right away. So it's difficult for you to monitor dehydration when you've been, working out there for multiple days in a row, because sometimes just heat alone can actually cause a lot of these symptoms of dizziness and headaches and stuff. So you can actually be hydrated, but because you've been outside where it's 105 every day for the last 4 or 5 days in a row, that really actually takes its toll on you. But both heat and dehydration are extreme concerns down here in the desert. So my tips always for people when they're out here in the desert is to make sure that you drink water. It seems like that's a pretty no-brainer type of activity, but it's kind of crazy how fast you can lose water down
Mm-hmm.
here, or how fast you can lose water just in general when you're outside. Um, in the desert, it's a little bit easier to monitor that stuff because you're just soaked with sweat. So if you're soaked with sweat, you should be drinking small sips of water all the time. But if you're working back east, Florida, Mississippi, North Carolina, you're probably soaked with sweat like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Your clothes probably, in fact, never even really dry because there's so much humidity. That's where it's really hard for you to make sure that you're hydrated, because you may not feel like you need to drink more water because you just may not feel dehydrated, or you may not be seeing the signs because your clothes are soaked all the way down to the socks all the time with
Mm-hmm.
sweat. But you still need to be sipping water, and it's the most difficult to monitor your water consumption when you're doing excavation, because you're not with a little water thing all the time, taking little sips. So when I first started, I used to use water bottles, and I always made fun of the guys down here in Arizona that were using the platypus or the camelback, because I thought it was like a silly children's flexi straw that they were slurping out of all the time. But I realized there's no way that you can stay hydrated down here without having that thing, because you need to be taking a little swallow of water like every 3 or 5 minutes. I'm kind of big and I sweat a lot, but I can drink 3 liters of water before lunchtime. So in like 4 or 5 hours, I drink like 3 liters, and then after lunch, I probably drink another 2 or 3 liters, and that's in a 10-hour day. Um, uh, Other people, they drink, at a lesser rate, but you should always be having some kind of sip every few minutes.
Okay.
That's really the only way that you can defend yourself from dehydration, because by the time you start feeling the effects, you're already dehydrated and you're already actually in fact in
Mm-hmm.
danger.
Yeah, that's totally right. And I'm in the Civil Air Patrol up here in Reno, and we have I'm actually the squadron commander, and we have like 45 cadets, so 12 to 18-year-olds, and we're constantly talking about dehydration here up in Reno in the summertime, because when these guys do outdoor activities, they're usually in their, it's called a BDU, the battle dress uniform, that camo sort of typical army looking uniform. That's what they wear outside, and it's just this heavy cotton thing that they that they wear in the middle of the summer. So we're always talking about dehydration, and it's no different for us archaeologists. And one of the ways, and this was really crucial. I actually use this a lot out in the Southeast, because you're absolutely right, Bill. The minute you walk out the door on July 1st in South Carolina, you're drenched in sweat. You're just absolutely drenched in sweat, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so, two things I wanted to mention about that. One, about water consumption. There are some metrics, and people always say, "Oh, you should drink X amount of water." Blah 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 blah. That's kind of just as much bullshit as drinking eight ounce glasses of water a day. Okay, that was invented like 50 years ago, and there's no science to it. You need to drink as much water as your body needs per day. Okay, so what you need to do is learn how to read whether or not your body actually needs water. If you stop sweating, you need water. In fact, you're well beyond the point where you need water if you stop sweating.
Yeah, you're close to hospitalization if you stop
Yeah,
sweating.
totally. But one of the easy ways we can tell, because if you're drinking enough water, you should have to pee. If you don't have to pee at once throughout the day, you're not drinking enough water. But when you do go, we're going to link to a few different resources on the show notes for this podcast. But there is a urine color chart, and there's 8 levels on it. That this is one of the ones that people mostly use. And on the one I'm going to link to, there's actually a red line on it that says, if you're below this red line, then you need to start drinking water, or you should have been drinking water all the time. But basically, it's a little yellowish Munsell chart for your pee, and just take a look at it. If you can actually see it really well while you're peeing, and it's got that, starting to get that yellow color, you're simply not drinking enough water, right? And I think for me, if I'm not going once every like hour and a half to 2 hours when it's really hot, then I'm just not drinking enough water. It starts to get that sort of sickly jaundicey color to it, and that's not good. But
I'm looking at the chart now, and like the division between safe and not safe, if you're like at your house or whatever, it's not really. I mean, if you're at your house or you're in the office, looking at level 3 and 4 here, you're not. It doesn't seem like you're in danger. You're not going to be having headaches or whatnot. Like, you'll be fine if you're in that range. You probably should have more water, or more coffee. But
and you're not.
If you're out in the field though, and you're at level 4, then you probably should start drinking now, because the water you drink now doesn't like instantly, it's not like a gas tank where it just instantly goes into the tank and you can use it. It takes a while for your body to
Yeah.
metabolize that, for it to go from your stomach into your actual body, an hour or two. So if you've already got headaches or your urine's looking like this thing in the chart, then you're right now, you're in trouble. You should act now, because in an hour you're going to be having some serious damage. But if you take action now, 2 hours from now you should be okay.
Yeah, and there's been one or two times in my CRM career, actually in my entire life, where I just I feel like where I just got close, and I was drinking a ton of water this one time. It was actually down in El Centro, California last year in September. I think it was September, maybe August. We had to go back and finish up some stuff. It was 110 plus, zero vegetation, hot sand, and me and one other girl were out there. We're trying to finish this survey up, and I actually did stop sweating. And I was slamming the water. I mean, I was slamming the water, and I stopped sweating, and that's when I knew. And we were a little ways away from the truck, and I told her, I was like, "Listen, we've got to go. I'm finished." And she was like, "Yep, we're done." And had to get back to the truck, and I basically just sat in the truck, drank some water. I drank some Gatorades, and sat there in the air conditioning with the truck pointed away from the sun and in the shade, and that calmed me down. I didn't have to go to the hospital or anything. But that's the closest I've ever gotten
Yeah.
in my life. Was last year doing that, and that just totally hit me by surprise. And I think part of the problem was I had just come off a 4-day, so I was probably just naturally dehydrated from being on a 4-day, because I don't typically drink that much water to begin with, like when I'm not working or hiking or something like that. So I probably started with not enough water in my system, and then bam, we hit 115-degree temperatures and desert, and I was done. So
Yeah. The other thing, so just like you said there, being aware and having that, like, you should be aware of your physical situation. And this gets into a whole gray area of, what's appropriate in the field or whatnot. But there's a lot of folks who are kind of tough guys or tough girls. They just want to like tough it out. They'll just keep digging even though they're in pain. They'll just keep walking even though they're dehydrated or whatever. But that's not a very smart plan, especially when you're in the desert or something like that,
mm-hmm.
because when someone goes from lightheaded, when they start to feel lightheaded or start to feel headaches or heat cramps or something like that, that's the boundary towards them being in hospitalization. And
Right.
you really only have like a few minutes, and it depends on the individual, but they can go from like lightheaded to hospitalization and passed out in like 5 minutes. So that's the time when you need to start going. And also, if you've gone to unconscious and you're that dehydrated, your brain is stopping working. We're talking
mm-hmm.
about physical effects for the rest of your life. So if somebody starts saying, "I don't feel so good, I've got headache," you got to go right then, unless you want to try to drag them across, the desert or through the forest for a mile or whatever when they pass out. And if they pass out, you got like 3 minutes to get them to air conditioning. So, it's just not a good idea to do that.
I was just going to add a comment on that and say also be careful, especially in some the more mountainous areas. So the Rocky Mountains out west and stuff, is we're talking about like, dehydration. But you also have to be careful about, working in the high deserts and temperature drops. Because in the summer, you can actually end up getting like hypothermia. And that's just real simple because temperature will drop down to, 40 or 50 at night. And after you've been sweating all day, you'll be, your clothes will be soaked through. And especially if you're camping and stuff, people will just not think they'll finally, after, it's gone from 100 degrees down to, 50 or 60, like, it feels so nice.
Mm-hmm.
But really, you do need to change out of your clothes if you have any sort of sweaty clothes in the evening when the temperature drops, because you'll end up not really paying attention, and then before you know it, your core body temperature starts dropping. And it does occasionally happen to a lot of backpackers, is they'll end up with hypothermia in the middle of June or July, because you're pretty high up, you've been sweating all day, you're so used to trying to get rid of all the heat that it just keeps going, and then you lose control.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally right. And while we're talking about heat exposure, we may as well roll right into sun exposure for the last part of this segment. So one of the things, about sun exposure is, of course, we're going to talk about sunscreen when we're going to talk about this. But before we even talk about sunscreen, we should take a lesson from, the indigenous communities in like, North Central Africa and things like that. You don't see them walking around in shorts and a t-shirt, or walking around like every guy over 50 thinks that when it's hot out and he's going to work on his RV, he has to take his shirt off and put on his cut-off jean shorts, right? But that actually doesn't keep you cooler.
Not in my neighborhood.
Yeah,
they don't do that in my neighborhood.
No, they're smarter down there. But it's like I actually used to do when I was working down in CRM, especially in the southeast. I was really obstinate about it. I was like, man, I just need to be, I'm trying to shovel test. I'm moving around. I can't have this long sleeve clothing, so I would wear short sleeve shirts. I'd have my my big hat on, but I would wear like short sleeve shirt and stuff like that, and I just apply the sunscreen like it was, just like crazy. And I was just adamant about not wearing anything over that. Now, maybe in the southeast, for somebody like me who's a big guy and I sweat a lot, maybe that is true. Maybe I can't be comfortable doing that. But either way, out here in the West, like especially all last year when we were working down in Southern California in the heat, just like constantly. I mean, I have these loose fitting. I'll wear a dry wicking shirt as my base layer, like a t-shirt, and then I had another dry wicking shirt as my outer layer, and that was just a button-up shirt that I would button it up. So most of the time I wouldn't, because my backpack was keeping it from flying around, and I would keep my arms completely covered up. Now I wouldn't do my hands, but I do know people that wear like sun gloves and things like that. Just a really, really thin pair of gloves. They're fingerless gloves, and they'll just wear them to protect their hands a little more. But yeah, that's the best thing you can do right there. And you can even get a lot of the clothing, the more expensive clothing, like some of the ex officio stuff and things like that. They have an SPF rating on their own, so you can get a little bit of sun protection just from the clothing, and then maybe apply some sunscreen underneath that. So, before we get into sunscreen, you guys, clothing, Bill, I'm sure people they cover up their arms and things like that down in the Arizona area when they're working, right?
Yeah, unless they're crazy.
Unless they're crazy, yeah.
No. I mean, it goes both ways. I found, well, first of all, when it comes to the clothing, I have my own taste, right? Everybody has their own taste, so
yeah.
Each to their own. But I think you are right about covering up. I found that my hair's black, so my head gets super hot unless I put like a bandana or a hat on, right? And I actually sizzled my ears once years ago in Nevada, actually White Pine County, and it wasn't very hot, but we were at like 5,500, 6,000 feet all day, and the tops of my ears got burned. So now I actually have to wear like a cowboy hat or whatever. So yeah, like your clothing and the stuff that you bring with you is really important. Not only for protecting yourself, but also for protecting other people. So I always try to carry bandanas with me because, I just wear them on my head most of the time. But also when somebody is in serious trouble, you can kind of cool their neck a little bit to try and bring them back to life so that you don't have to carry them all the way to the Jeep. You notice how like all my techniques are basically so I don't have to carry anyone.
It's a big concern when you're 5 miles from the vehicle.
Yeah, I'm basically taking care of myself by not having to taking care of other people so I don't have to carry them.
Right.
Yeah, so the bandana thing. And then another thing I do is, so, now I do have a backpack that has the platypus hydration system in it, and it's got the tube, and I go ahead and drink the water. And I personally, even when it gets hot in the tube, like, so there's some people who will take the first drink off the tube and then spit it out because they don't like the tea-like heat of the tube. But if you just keep drinking more water and make sure the water's flowing through the tube, then it never gets super hot in there. But I still drink that part. And then another thing I'll do is freeze like one of those little mini water bottles full of Pedialyte, and then put that in the same sheath where the hydration bladder's at, because that frozen little block, well, it helps keep my water minorly cool. But as that thing thaws out, basically you have like a dose of Pedialyte that if someone actually gets in trouble out there, not only can you take that cool little thing and put it on the back of their neck with the bandana, just hold it on the back of their neck so they can cool down, but they can also drink it and get electrolytes. And I actually more than one time have given that to someone and watched them come back to life long enough for us to get back to the car. And then another thing that we do is well, I don't know about we, but at least the crews I work with, freeze the Pedialyte pops for children and then put them in the water, the orange water jug in the Jeep or whatever. So it's not only iced, but then at the end of the day, you can have a little popsicle of Pedialyte. And that way, you know that everyone on your crew is getting at least one dose of Pedialyte.
Nice.
And that stuff works way better than Gatorade. Gatorade, it takes, I could literally pour the water into that entire huge thing of Gatorade, stir it around with a spoon and drink that, and I'd still feel like garbage. But Pedialyte's designed for, children that are like in the hospital, or, kids that are so young they can't really eat solid food. So, they of course need to drink like an eighth of a cup or a few tablespoons of Pedialyte, a tiny baby. But if you drink half a thing of Pedialyte when you get back to your hotel room, you won't feel any effects of dehydration or anything for the whole time you're out there. I guarantee it.
Nice. I like it. All right, we're going to come back to this because we got a lot more to say about sun protection and things like that. But we're going to take a break real quick to play an ad for PCS, Professional Certification for Sciences, and our jobs board. We've had a few jobs listed on there, but I'm encouraging everybody, while the job listings are free, if you're posting somewhere else and you're hearing this, why not just post on PCS at the same time? It doesn't cost you a dime, and what could it hurt? So post on there, and if you're a job seeker, ask your employers why they're not posting on PCS. So there you go. Back in a second. Professional Certifications for Scientists, or PCS, aims to provide practical educational videos, field guides, knowledge tests, professional certifications, and employment connections to professional scientists everywhere. Check out the jobs page for job listings in contract archaeology. Post a job for just $50. All of PCS's jobs are verified and checked for completeness. Find PCS jobs at www.pcscourses.com/jobs. PCS, a place for good scientists to become great science professionals. All right, we're back, and we're going to continue this discussion about sun exposure a little bit because we didn't quite finish that, and then we'll get into the fun topic of mosquitoes, ticks, and ants, and other nasty insects. But for now, we were talking about loose-fitting clothing, so wear loose-fitting clothing. It'll help you out, trust me. Preferably light-colored loose-fitting clothing, just because, the sun, the darker colors absorb more radiation from the sun, so they'll actually make you hotter. So do that. And keep in mind, too, that it doesn't have to be 110 degrees out for you to adhere to these rules. If you're working in the desert, in the high desert at 4,000 or 5,000 feet altitude, and it's only 75 degrees, guess what? You're still getting sunburned, and you're still getting cancer. You're still getting all the harmful effects of the sun. You're still getting dehydrated. You might not realize it, but you are. So keep all those things in mind. So let's talk about sunscreen real quick. I've got linked into the show notes here. I've got something from the FDA on sun exposure guidelines. And they talk about sunscreen in there. One of the things you need to know when you're looking for a sunscreen is you need to know what UVA is and UVB. So those are the different spectrums of ultraviolet radiation. UVA causes skin cancer. UVB causes sunburns. Okay. Now, even when it's a cloudy day, I was putting sunscreen on a cloudy day one time, and somebody asked me, he's like, what are you doing? It's totally cloudy out. And I was like, yeah, because I couldn't remember which one it is, and I still can't remember, but one of those makes it through the clouds pretty easily. One of those wavelengths, they make it through the clouds real easily, so you can still get harmful effects. I think it's probably UVA, because you just don't get sunburned on a cloudy day, but you can still get cancer-causing effects from the sun on a cloudy day. So, the sun's up there; it's still there. It's just you can't see it very well, but it's still causing harm. So when you look for sunscreen, look for UVA and UVB protection. It'll probably just say broad spectrum protection, which does usually cover those, but it should also say that in the fine print somewhere. So, in reference to the whole cloudy day thing, Doug, you've been in Scotland for a while. Do people even use sunscreen out there? Do they even sell it in the stores?
Do you even have sun?
Yeah,
we do. Like right now, we're in the summer, so we're pretty far north. So the sun doesn't set till like 9 or 10. Actually 10 or 11, and all sorts of fun. But no, it's actually a really too many archaeologists over here end up with really crap skin conditions because they basically do what you were talking about, Chris. Oh, it's cloudy. I don't need to do anything. Or even then, people will get really badly burned. So they'll be like, oh, the sun only came out for an hour. But when your skin is not used to the sun and you're the color of milk, there's no natural protection. You pretty much burn. So people do have, suntan lotion, sunscreen, whatever you want to call it. And but it is like you run into so many new archaeologists. I remember the last commercial dig I did. At lunch, I handed it off to the new guy. First day, he's like, "Oh no, I don't need it." I'm like, "No, trust me, you'll need it." And he's like, "Oh," so I forced him to put it on. But even then, it was too late. Like 2 hours later, he had a sunburn. It's just you don't think about it, but honestly, if people are smart, they do definitely need to put on some sort of protection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you always have to put it on no matter where you're at. I mean, it doesn't matter. And when you say, I just like to point out, when you say your skin's not used to the sun, that's like the people that say, oh, I don't, my ears don't ring after concerts anymore because my ears are used to it. No, you can't hear in those spectrums anymore. So, you can't hear at those wavelengths anymore. It's the same thing with sun exposure. If you're not getting burned anymore, it's because you're probably already leathery, right? Like your skin is just repelling the sun naturally now.
Well, I work with a lot of folks, that have brown skin naturally, mixed people, either Asian, Native American, African. They don't, and me personally, I don't actually have to wear sunscreen to be out there. I play out with my kids, and it's like 110, and we're outside all day long, and I don't have a shirt on, and I don't get burned, I don't get roasted, right? So for me to like miss a day of sunscreen or whatever, that's not too disastrous, right? But the question is, what's going to happen a million years from now? And I'm not really up on what's the skin cancer rate for sub-Saharan Africans versus Native American versus whatever. Like, I don't actually know if I'm more likely to get skin cancer in the future. But if everybody on the crew is putting on sunscreen, and it's right there next to me, and we know that this will reduce the amount of rays, right?
Set the example.
Why? Yeah, well, why not just put it on? It's right there.
Yeah.
So, I do put on sunscreen. I don't have to put it on. I'm not going to burn. My ears have gotten roasted, like I said, because we were like, above this clouds basically. And so the UV rays were, much more powerful up there. But I don't necessarily get sunburns. People with enough melanin in their skin are not going to get sunburns no matter how long we're out there. However, you just use it because it's right there.
Well, that's the question, Bill. It's funny. It's good you bring that up because I never actually thought about that before. I did know that, the increased amount of melanin in dark-skinned individuals, like you said, anywhere from Asian to African American or whatever, that does tend to prevent sunburns or at least minimize sunburns. But what about UVA? How does the increased amount of melanin in your skin affect skin cancer? Do you know any of the stats on that at all?
No, I don't, and I also don't know. I don't know a whole bunch of Hispanic laborers or African American laborers that we've been working outside all day long, right? But I think that probably what hurts archaeologists the most is that we don't actually work outside all the time. Mm-hmm. So we're inside, for 4 or 5 days, then we're outside for 4 or 5 days, then we're inside for 2 weeks, then we're outside for 2 months. And so we keep going in and out, so we never actually, in fact, are out there long enough or all the time, like, say a construction worker or a landscaper, somebody who actually works outside all the time. But I'll tell you what, even landscapers down here, construction guys, Hispanic folks, they wear sunscreen. So I don't know if everybody's wearing it, but I know I've seen them put it on. I've been at the construction site. They got brown skin like me, and they still put it on too.
Well, one thing I've noticed, especially about Hispanic people, I know up here, is they're smart about it. They're constantly wearing long sleeve, loose fitting clothing and big floppy hats and things like that. It's not a cultural statement. It's smart. You're working outside all day. You cover up, so maybe they don't need to wear sunscreen like that because they're protecting themselves with their clothing, like we said at the beginning of this segment. I think Doug's pulled some numbers down. What do you got, Doug?
Yeah, so according to the CDC, basically so Not surprising, men have higher skin cancer rates than women. I'm pretty sure that's just from, as you're talking about, Chris, all those dudes in their 50s when they go to wash the RVs.
I'm never going to your neighborhood. I don't want to see cut off short, naked top men. Nah, that's.
Yeah, actually, so
Nice.
so for and it's gone up. So about 10 years ago, white guys were about 20%, and now it's around a little under 30%. But basically, for sort of black, it's under 5%, and Hispanic is around 5% as well. And then same for like Hispanic and Native American are pretty much on the same sort of range. It goes up and down, and it's about 5%, and that's for guys. And then women tend to be pretty much the same for when it comes to black, Hispanic, and so forth. It's white women who have probably about 10% less skin cancer than men. But yeah, it is a very small percentage. But yeah, dying of skin cancer is still not fun. So
No.
Okay. Well, I guess I don't have to wear it anymore then. I'll go back to the old days where I never wore it and I used to wear short sleeve shirts, right?
Well, the numbers make sense based on anecdotal evidence because, like I said, I always see Hispanic people dressing properly, and according to Bill, black people don't like to go outside or hike or anything, except for him. So I remember you saying that before.
Hey, it's not me. It's the National Park Service. Like they're like, how can we get more black people to go outside? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm out here. You guys don't see me. My whole family.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's plenty of black folks out there hiking and doing all that stuff, right? But I guess not as many as white people.
yeah, but even then, like you're still looking at a couple of percentage points of people who do get skin cancer. So
Yeah.
I'd say better safe than sorry.
All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit and head straight over to bugs. So I'm going to tell a quick story real quick just to illustrate my hatred of mosquitoes and fire ants and things like that. So I was working in the Southeast. Actually, I was working in Florida. All the Southeast has a huge problem with mosquitoes and ticks and things like that. But in this particular case, I was working in South Florida, down south of Lake Okeechobee. That's like South Central Florida, between the lake and probably the Everglades. Kind of imagine that area. And we were working in this, we were doing shovel tests down these rows of tall sugarcane fields, right? And it's sugarcane that had been allowed to just grow for like the last 20 years. I think it was 20 years or something like that. They hadn't used it in a long time. They hadn't used the fields in a long time. They'd abandoned them by U.S. Sugar, so they just were overgrown and taken over. So, we're crashing through these things. It's the kind of thing where you stick your shovel and your screen out in front of you to get rid of all the spider webs and stuff like that. And so occasionally on like the corner of a plot, where two roads intersect, there'd be this big cement platform where they would stage gear back when they used to use it. And I had come out of my transect and I was waiting for a friend of mine that was working, and I had come out of my transect and they were just coming out of their, he was just coming out of his transect, or he was doing his last shovel test. All of a sudden I hear this scream and he just comes running out. He'd thrown his screen in his shovel. I don't even know where it was. He comes running out onto the middle of this platform. And I mean, I wasn't about to run over to him because he looked like somebody I didn't want to be around at the time. So I was going to wait and play this one out. And he took off his backpack, took off his shirt, took off his boots, and took off his pants and started slapping himself. And he was just covered in fire ants. Just covered in fire ants. So I know, as far as I know, there's nothing that you can apply to yourself that will prevent you from getting fire ants. If you're in an area where you're working with fire ants, some of the things you can do are like, I've seen people duct tape their the bottom of their pants to their boots, or tuck in their socks to their pants so they don't get anything up inside, which also helps for ticks. And I've seen people do that. But on this project, I mean, it was July, August. I mean, I'm surprised I'm still alive today, quite honestly. I'm glad it was only two months that I was down there, maybe a month and a half, I don't know. But either way, it was super hot, super humid, and every morning I would put on, I started with DEET, the 100% DEET stuff that comes in the little bottle that they say, the minute it touches like clothing or plastic, it's ruined. and So I was putting 100% DEET on my arms because, again, I was an idiot and I wasn't wearing long sleeve shirts. I had short sleeve shirts on. So I was putting it on my arms, my neck, my head, my ears, my face. And then I was covering that with SPF 50 or more sunscreen. And when you get higher on the SPF numbers, it's like a thick, almost a paste that sunscreen is. So you mix that with the DEET. And I was just putting on this disgusting DEET sunscreen paste. And I was relatively new in the field, and I didn't really know what I was doing. One of the things we forgot to mention about sunscreen is you need to reapply it every 2 hours, even more if you're sweating a lot. The FDA actually says they're not allowed to put sweatproof on sunscreen, but they do anyway, because it's not actually true. So, and it could give people a false sense of security. But you should apply every 1.5 to 2 hours regardless, okay? If you're out in the sun, you should always do that. And probably the same for the DEET and things like that if you're actually putting that on. But either way, the DEET and the sunscreen were helping to protect me from sunburns. I didn't get any sunburns, which was good. So I guess I was putting it on enough. But it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare working around, mosquitoes that were the size of small helicopters, ticks, and all that stuff. Now, one thing with ticks real quick too, just to continue the story, I've had ticks on me a lot, working in the Southeast, and actually in the Midwest, but I've never had I've found them on me and then I've just flicked them away. I've actually never had a tick embedded in me, which is strange. I've worked around plenty of ticks. I've been on cruise where every single other person went back to the hotel room. They had 15 ticks dug into their skin and I had nothing. So I don't know what it is with my skin. I guess I'm just not tasty enough or what the deal is. I've heard things about, different types of skin and whether or not you're susceptible to mosquitoes and ticks. I mean, I'm definitely susceptible to mosquitoes. I've had plenty of mosquito bites, but ticks, I don't know. I don't know what the deal is.
I think you're now permanently radioactive from using that much 100% DEET. Like now your chromosomes have changed. Like
right?
you could probably join like the Justice League or whatever, but I mean, just for bugs.
I think I'm a superhero. I think I am.
So the 100% DEET, I always kind of freak out about that because, I mean, the bottle's super small and it's like, the actual warning sheet on it is bigger than the actual bottle is. You open it up and it's like, warning, don't let a baby ever touch this. If you have a seizure, and it's kind of like, what? A seizure from bug spray? So I always go for like the 30 to 50% because I actually don't believe. Well, I saw we'll link to it in the show notes, but there's also a thing from Consumer Reports where the people who make it say that 30% DEET, 30% or higher has an equal protection value for up to 8 hours. So if you're putting on 100, you're kind of like putting on 3 days worth of DEET. But there's good, 45 and 50% ones and 30% ones that I've used.
Mm-hmm.
Now my kids are older. I kind of put the 30 on, but before that we didn't put anything on. I just tried to keep them away from the mosquitoes.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on. You're putting on the DEET, and then the ticks just don't like it because I remember a time in Illinois I was eating lunch and I had a tick, and it was when I somehow was still wearing shorts. Right. I watched while I ate my lunch, watched this tick crawl on my socks, and it got up to my legs where I had bug spray. Well, of course my socks and shoes and everything were soaked in bug spray, but my legs also had it on too, and it was just walking up, and it would find a little spot and it would bite, and then it would, I guess taste nasty, and it would crawl like a few more centimeters, and then it would bite, and then it would crawl a little more and then bite. And I watched that for about 20 minutes. So I just don't think they like the flavor of DEET. So it's not that they're getting poisoned or whatever. They just are less likely to bite someone who's soaked in DEET.
Bill, were you not worried about Lyme's disease?
Dude, it was so hot, man. I was just like sitting there exhausted eating a bologna sandwich. There was like mosquitoes on me all around. I had just gone into like a Zen-like trance, like only 3 more hours, Yeah, no, I was worried about that, but I'm not joking. Like if you look, the things like mouth wasn't even actually going into my skin. It was literally like, I guess, tasting the DEET and then crawling to a spot, and then never found one that was delicious.
Well, Bill, I didn't start with 100% DEET on that project. I gradually moved to 100% DEET because nothing else was working. I started with just like regular bug spray and then sunscreen, and the mosquitoes were like, fuck that, this stuff is tasty. So they would just go on and, keep on biting me. And It was just, it was ridiculous. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Well, one of the things when we're talking about insects, I know these aren't insects, but like arachnids and spiders and things like that, is it helps to understand also the area you're working in. So when I first worked down in Florida, the banana spider, if you've ever seen a freaking banana spider, they're the scariest looking spider you've ever seen in your life, right? I mean, they can get up to the females. I think it's the typical thing in the spider community where the female's huge and the male's tiny. But the females, I mean, they get up to, sometimes 2 inches in length or more, right? When they're just sitting on their web. And I'll never forget, before I knew anything about them, I'm driving with this other girl. We're in this Ford Explorer, and we're driving through this like grassy area with 2 high walls of vegetation on either side, and we're just trying to find this one area we're going to. And we're driving through, and right in the middle of the road, right at like window level, was the biggest spider web I've ever seen, with a huge freaking spider sitting right in the middle of it, right? So we stopped, and it was like a standoff, and we're like, maybe he'll move. And we started getting closer. We honked our horn. We were hoping it would go off the web or something, because we were both totally freaked out because we were little pansies, myself included. And so eventually I just gunned it, and we floored it. But then when we got to where we were going, neither of us wanted to get out because we were pretty sure that spider was on the roof waiting for us. So, but either way, my point is 2 things that I experienced that were totally scary in the Southeast. One is those spiders, and the other one is the black snake, right? The black snake can be 3, 4, 5 feet long, right? But neither of those things are poisonous or venomous, right? Neither of them are. So the banana spider, it's got fangs, but it's not going to kill you, right? And it's probably not even going to bite you, right? It just looks scary, and that's part of the thing with the animal kingdom. It's flashy and yellow and bright, and it looks scary because it doesn't have any venom. So, and then the black snake, also scary looking, but also won't kill you, right? Nothing like a rattlesnake or something like that. So once you learn something a little more about what you're working around, you can, I guess, mitigate your fears or something like that, and not be so afraid of it. So we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to talk about alligators real quick, because fuck alligators, and then we'll move on.
Hi everyone, this is Christopher Dorr with Heritage Business International, and here's this week's Heritage Business Tip from the archive. This week, we look at the importance of innovation. Become the Uber of the heritage industry. Set a goal to innovate just one disruptive product or service this year. It's much harder than you think, but if you're successful, you'll be set to dominate the industry. To receive our most up-to-date heritage business tips, you can subscribe to our free weekly email at heritagebusiness.org. Until next time, this is Christopher Dorr.
Okay, we're back for our final segment. We're moving through some of this stuff, so we might get a lot of it done. So anyway, real quick, we're going to go, Doug is going to talk about Lyme disease, because we haven't really talked about ticks. We all know ticks are crazy and bad and things like that. But ticks can also, instead of just sucking, and I mean like literally sucking, and attaching themselves to your skin, they can give you nasty diseases, just like mosquitoes can. Mosquitoes can give you Zika virus, as we're hearing in the news, which we didn't really talk about much. Just avoid mosquitoes. That's really all you got to know. But ticks, Doug.
Yeah, so actually Lyme disease is something that we have here in Scotland as well. And you mainly find it in places like Michigan, the Northeast. You get them a lot from deer ticks. But unfortunately, it's actually exploding. They're getting a lot more, because of global warming, you're getting a lot more cases of Lyme disease. And it is just a horrendously bad disease. Basically, you'll know you have it when on your shoulder, your arm, you'll get what they call the bullseye. And you may not get this. So you may get Lyme disease, and they'll have to do a test to tell it. But the sort of telltale sign is you get this sort of bullseye, which is sort of a red circle, looks a little bit like a bullseye, that's the term, on your shoulder. And that's when you know you're kind of screwed, because Lyme disease, it never goes away. It will resurface, 5-10 years later, or even just every couple of months. There's some people it just decimates. Basically, you end up with all sorts of, body aches, lethargic, headaches. basically it's like being sick nonstop, and there is no cure for it, and it never goes away, and it can just pop up randomly every couple of years. So you could experience the symptoms, get better, and the symptoms can last for months, if not years at a time, and then you could wait a couple of years and then it could pop right back up. So it's something like, if you're in an area that has Lyme's disease, oh man, like, yeah, Bill, when you were saying like you're in Michigan and that was happening, I was just thinking like, oh, Bill, you are so lucky. You can get Lyme's. Like, it's just a horrendously bad disease, and that's one of the areas where you can catch it as well. If you're working in an area with ticks, check to see if Lyme's disease is something in that area, and if it is, like, do everything, duct tape all, your boots to your pants, gloves, anything. You really just do not want to catch Lyme's disease.
I was in Illinois, but I mean, yeah, if you're from the mountains, same difference. But in Illinois, yeah, so at the time when I was letting that tick bite like that, I actually did not know that there was Lyme disease. I didn't know that was something you could get. That was right when I was first starting to do archaeology. So nowadays, I probably would not let a tick bite me like that unless I did have the same heat, exhaustion, I don't know. You never know. But I probably wouldn't let a tick bite me anymore. However, in that same area, that Illinois area, a little while ago, I read about 2 more tick-borne viruses, and I actually wrote a blog post about it. One's called Heartland virus, and it's spread through the Lone Star tick and other tick, and it seems like tick or mosquito bites. And then another one called bourbon virus. And so both of these are coming from Kansas, Missouri, Tennessee, and only a few people have gotten them, but they died. And so no one really even knew that they had this kind of disease. It's just recently been documented by the CDC. I suggest you check them out somewhere because no one really knows how this happens. They know that it comes from tick bites, but we don't really know anything about the virus. We don't know if it's a variation of Lyme disease or any of the other existing tick-borne diseases. But you're right, Doug. We got to protect ourselves from those kind of animals.
Yeah. All right. So watch out for ticks. That's the big thing. You can get little tick removal kits. People will tend to burn them off sometimes. I know you've got to be careful because if you pull a tick off the wrong way, its little pinchers and stuff can still be stuck in your skin and still injecting you with whatever nasty stuff they've got. So watch out for that. If you can, have a friend do it for you. I remember I had a friend who called me one time. She was in another state. I don't know if she was on a crew where she just wasn't comfortable with the people on that crew or something like that, but she said she got home and there were like 15 ticks in her back and she couldn't reach them and she was freaking out. And I eventually got her to just have one of the other people on the crew help her out with that. And I was like, you've got to get this taken care of. You can't just leave them there. And so yeah, if you're in an area with ticks, get familiar with at least one person on your crew enough to where you guys can maybe check each other out, because sometimes those ticks will get in places where you just can't see them. You maybe be able to feel them, but you can't do anything about them. So, and also keep in mind ticks like the sort of hot, dark, warm areas of your body, if you know what I mean. So check those really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So,
well, before you move on, does the same stuff that works on ticks also keep you from getting chiggers?
That I don't know. I mean, they're in the same sort of family, aren't they?
Well, I know that the same bug sprays, they list it all on there, but in Arizona, there's some chiggers, like further south in the grassland areas, but really that's kind of like an Illinois and Midwest, Virginia, Southeast thing. You notice how I just rolled half of the country into one. That's a Flatlander thing, right? Where they have grass and water and stuff. That's what that happens there. But I've known people who've gotten chiggers before, and it sounds to me like just as bad, if not worse, than a tick bite. Except for you can get serious diseases from ticks. I don't know if you can get the same thing from chiggers. But if anyone's listening to this and they know about chiggers, give us a call, hit us up. We'd love to know more how to keep ourselves from getting rashes from chigger bites.
One more thing on ticks too that I just remembered is the little tick ball. The little seed ticks. They like to be in a tightly packed little ball of ticks that are just like their little. It's a little orgy of tickness right there, and if you touch that or brush up against that, it will literally just explode ticks all over you. It's pretty nasty, and avoid it. Know what it looks like and avoid it, because I tend to just crash through vegetation when I'm doing stuff, like especially in the southeast. You're just like, you want to get to your next shovel test and just like, bam, I got to walk in a straight line. I'm going to crash through this stuff and go. And it's not a good idea sometimes. You need to really know what you're looking for and know what's in your area. And kind of the whole point of all this stuff is, especially if you're new in that area, ask your crew chief or ask, some of the project manager, somebody that actually works in that company full time, and say, what's here? What have you guys heard of? What kind of diseases do the animals have? What do I need to be worried about? Because if you get a tick bite or a mosquito bite or something like that, and there's some nasty disease like in your area right now, you might have to get checked out. And that should be covered under workers' comp, would be my guess. Don't quote me on that. But if you get a bite at work, that should be covered under workers' comp if you have to go and get it checked out. Make sure you don't have some nasty disease related to that. So,
yeah. So, and it sucks, but usually if you're in a place with there's ticks, it's usually somewhat wetter than other places. But the sort of full length waterproof. So those like waterproof overalls and stuff that sometimes are actually just a full boot as well. We use those out in Scotland. I mean, mainly because it rains a lot, but it is really good at keeping off ticks and other bugs. Sometimes you'll be walking out in the forest and you'll be going through vegetation. You'll just hear pop, 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 and then if you look down, you'll actually see it's the ticks jumping off the branches trying to land on you. Which is scary as hell and completely disconcerting, but it may be very hot, especially if you're in the summer and it's humid and stuff like that, and you just want to strip down to wherever loosest possible clothes. It's really not a good idea. It's better to just drink a lot of water and stew in your sweat than end up with some horrible disease.
Right, indeed. Okay, all good points. Let's again touch on some other animals real fast that you might be encountered in your fieldwork travels, and I'd love to hear about the stuff that we don't cover or anybody's stories. I want to hear people's stories about their encounters with these animals. So, the scariest one for me that I can think of, aside from rattlesnakes, which kind of get a little routine sometimes in different areas. I mean, sure, rattlesnakes are never routine, but I don't know. You know what I mean? But one of the first things I really encountered in the field when I was working in archaeology was freaking alligators, okay? And this is the same horrible project down in southern Florida that I was just talking about a couple segments ago. And, I mean, basically, the scary thing about alligators is, sure, they'll typically just run away if they hear you crashing through something. And when we were coming through the sugarcane fields, you would hear this crash and a splash, and they jump into the canal right next to it, right? And because these were abandoned sugarcane fields, the canals weren't maintained, so the water level in the canal was right up to the edge, and they were totally muddy. So you couldn't see through the water at all. So the alligators like to sit on the surface, and then they would jump into the water when they heard you crashing. But the thing about alligators is when they get scared, they're only scared for a couple seconds. And then their little beady eyes and their little beady nostrils pop out of the water, and they just start kind of slowly floating towards you. And if you're standing next to that dike and you're not paying attention, they'll just jump up and grab you. So one of the quick stories I have about that is I was trying to find this place I was supposed to be monitoring when I was on that project with the sugarcane fields. And they were building these massive dikes around the area because they're planning on flooding the whole area. That's why we were out there and turning it into a water reservoir. And so I'm standing next to this dike that's probably 20 feet across. And on the other side of the dike is on the other side of the canal. I'm sorry. I was standing across a 20-foot wide canal. And on the other side of that canal was a dike that was probably 30 feet high. And on the top of that was a bulldozer. And the bulldozer operator was standing out on the treads, pointing and telling me which roads to take to get to where I needed to go, because I'd done some monitoring with him before. And I was slowly walking towards him because he was difficult to hear. And I was walking in this mud, it was because of the canal water was right up to the edge. And I don't know how close I was to the canal, but I was getting closer and closer without really knowing it. And at the end of the conversation, since I'm kind of looking up, I wasn't looking down because he was up on that dike. He goes, "Oh, and you better watch out for that alligator in front of you." Just like as part of the conversation. And I look down and I see these beady eyes and nostrils probably 2 feet in front of me, on the biggest head I've ever seen in my life, and I immediately threw myself backwards, promptly fell on my ass in the mud, rolled over, and like crawled out on hands and knees in the mud. I don't know how I didn't get my ass bit by an alligator at that point in time, but it scared the crap out of me. So I don't know if you guys have ever worked on around alligators, but it's totally freaky and scary. So just don't do it.
Your stories are basically making it sound like I should fly in, go to Disney World, and then leave right away. Like, don't get out of Disney World. Don't get out of your car.
Dude, I don't like Florida. If you're getting what I'm saying here, like I don't like Florida. Going to the SAAs was really tough for me. Like I stayed in the hotel. I didn't go outside much. I was just like, screw this place. I can't stand Florida. And sorry, Floridians out there, but it's not for me.
Yeah, no joke. Since you almost got eaten by like everything they have there.
Oh, I know. And then the other crazy thing we would encounter occasionally are the wild boars. The wild boars, and they're young. They will stand their ground with their huge tusks, and they will just sit there and snort at you, and they'll charge at you if you're provoking them at all. So, yeah. All right. So let's move to
the snakes in Arizona are
that's what we're going to next.
Yeah.
So tell us about the nasty snakes in Arizona, Bill.
Yeah, so I think there's like 4 rattlesnakes, poisonous rattlesnakes in Arizona, and I've seen all of them except for the Sidewinder and the Diamondback. There's a reason why the baseball team is called the Diamondbacks, because they're like everywhere. And at my house, I do my best to keep mice and other things away from the house, because the snakes will figure out that there's mice there, and then my kids are like, the next thing they're gonna bite. But with rattlesnakes, it seems like springtime is their mating time, and that's when they're actually kind of freewheeling and all over the place. But and also really active and ready to bite. But most of the time, you're gonna see rattlesnakes like all the time in Arizona, the Southwest. You're gonna see them. Probably if you're actually paying a lot of attention and you're in the right area, you're gonna see one like every week. But most of the time, you're far enough away that it's not really that big of a deal. The only problem is when you are in that 2-foot range, they'll rattle, they'll buzz, and then you're going to have to move fast. So, like, first of all, you're supposed to be looking for archaeology sites anyway, right? So if you're already paying attention to that, then look for stuff like rattlesnakes too. And also, don't be crazy about going near bushes and stuff. I know it's hot, but don't go underneath trees and shade and stuff like that, because that's exactly where they're going to be at if you're in the flatlands. And then the other concern is when you're scrambling up rocks or, in kind of rocky areas, mountainous terrain, because then you really actually can't tell. Every time that I've been buzzed by rattlesnakes, it was when I was trying to climb up over a rock, like a hill or something like that, or a rocky area, and they were, I got too close. Because most of the time, if you see it, you just literally walk a few feet away. Unless you're crazy, you just keep walking away, just get away from it, right?
Yeah.
So they're not really that big of a, but I do know a lot of people who have been buzzed by them, and a couple people who have actually been like, they've snapped at them before. I haven't known any, thank God, no one on my crew or whatever has been bit, but they do snap at you. And I don't know if we're supposed to fill out a close call thing, because like that happens so often that it's almost not even a call. Like you said, it gets routine kind of, you just hear a rattlesnake. The shit gets scared out of you. You step back, you get away from it, obviously, take a few minutes to get okay, you're safe, you made it, and then keep going. And like I said, during their mating season, you really got to watch out. But just don't if you look at the rattlesnake bite, the amount of, so 2 things. The anti-venom for rattlesnakes, they don't actually necessarily know if there's a correlation between the anti-venom and actually you getting saved by it, because the people who die from rattlesnakes usually don't go to the hospital where they give them the anti-venom, right? So everybody who dies from a rattlesnake bite and they were given the anti-venom, they don't really know if it works, basically, because there's a lot of people who die who never even actually get it, right? But most people that are adults don't die from getting a rattlesnake bite. You can get really sick. You can get all kinds of bacterial infections and stuff. But we're pretty large animals, so it's not really enough to kill you. However, the Mojave rattler is it gives you the most load. And if you're allergic to it, you're probably going to die too. And then the other thing is, most people who get bit by a rattlesnake were messing with the rattlesnake. So if you don't mess with rattlesnakes, you're less likely to get bit. And it boils down to that. You see a rattlesnake, you just get out of their way. Know where they like to hide at what time of the day, and just don't go there.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna end up closing here on rattlesnakes because we got 2 minutes to go. But in the last project I was on, we had sometimes several snakes a day that were seen, and not just seen, but like snapped at people. From under the truck because they like it where it's cool under there, especially in the hot desert sun, or like you said, under a bush or something like that. In fact, a lot of my guys went and bought snake gator boots. So the knee high boots you can get that are supposed to be rattlesnake proof. The thing with the rattlesnake is, though, these big ones out in the desert, it might not be jumping at your leg. It could jump at your hand. It could jump up, all the way up to your waist or something like that, and just, mouth open, bam, get you. So you really do have to just be aware of where they're at, and which sometimes you can't do anything about encountering a rattlesnake, but you can mitigate your circumstances once you get to the rattlesnake. Like you said, Bill, don't go near them.
I forgot to mention the gators, and seriously, those will protect you. The teeth may go through the actual what is it, like the nylon
Kevlar,
or the leather.
Kevlar, yeah.
If you have the leather ones, yeah. So the teeth may actually go into that, or may go through it, or something like that. I've heard stories of them going into that, and then the person, killed the rattlesnake because it was stuck to its leg or whatever. But those snake gators, if you're in rattlesnake country, think about it. Just go ahead and wear it. I know your leg is just going to be pouring with sweat, and it's going to be so uncomfortable to wear them. But seriously, if they're everywhere and you don't think that you're going to have a chance to see it, or you're going through grass, just wear the snake gators.
Yeah, it's always a good call. Especially, you got to look at your area too. Like we'd called the local hospital to make sure they did have the antivenom, just in case. But the problem is, like, we were on a military base, and they were like, you know what, we're not really going to fly a helicopter out there to get to you. You can call us, but it might take an hour for a helicopter to get to you because it's not just sitting on standby waiting. So, and then it was an hour and a half drive out for us. So I actually had snake bite kits for each of the crews, which can help. Some of this stuff may or may not work. Who knows? But it's good to have it, and it's good to know how to use it. You know what I mean? It's better than nothing. So,
yeah. And also, if you've never been bit by a rattlesnake, which is 99.9% of everybody in the world, just take some Benadryl if you can actually, stop from spazzing out long enough to swallow a pill or whatever. It's probably a good idea because you don't know if you're allergic. And I don't know if Benadryl is going to be enough to, save you or whatever, but I try to carry a couple of, gel caps and a couple of the other solid ones in case someone gets bit by a bee and they don't know if they're allergic. So hopefully someone who's actually allergic to a bee has their rights, their EpiPen and everything else. But for those people who have only been bit once or never bit before, they probably should just go ahead and take some Benadryl, because that hopefully will be enough for you to start seeing that individual is having an allergic reaction and give you just that tiny bit more. And like I said, I don't know if Benadryl is going to help, someone who's bit with a rattlesnake or whatever. But hey, we got to get to the hospital anyway, and it's not going to happen in 5 minutes. So might as well just start doing the snake bite kit and Benadryl and like whatever the hell else you can do, Except for they say sucking the poison out doesn't work.
Yeah.
No, don't do that.
I don't want to do that anyway.
So like first aid is if someone gets bit, and actually quite a few rattlesnakes, the ones you have to worry about most are the smaller ones because they're young and they tend to use a lot of venom and don't have great control. But actually a lot of snake bites, you get bit and nothing really happens because they haven't injected venom into you. But if you do basically so Bill, your sort of handkerchief idea, basically you take that and above the bite, so if it's on your arm or your leg, you loosely tie it there. So you want to be able to fit your fingers in between the tie, but you basically want to slow down the spread. And the person who got bit should not move as much as possible. So it's going to get into your bloodstream, and the less you freak out, which is a bit hard to do when you've just been bitten by a snake, but the less you move, the less you're going to be pushing the poison throughout your entire body if you did get it. So if possible, if you have a crew, have them carry the other person and have them move at least amount as possible, and tie off some sort of bit of clothing above the bite to try to slow down the spread. And then, basically call in for 911 and see if they'll send out a helicopter or get them to the car as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, we're going to close down this podcast. I really do want to hear everybody's stories. Put something in the comments or on Facebook, since you probably just read the title of this podcast and didn't actually make it this far and you're commenting now. But, please listen. And we've got a lot of stuff that we want to still cover, but we'll probably do that on additional shows. We'll add some more stuff to it, and we'll get to it. We'll bring some other people in to talk about it too. And maybe we'll, when you tell us your stories, let us know if we can read those on the website, because one of the best ways to learn in this field is to learn from other people, learn from other people's mistakes. So, a lot of this stuff that's been encountered has already been encountered by somebody else. And, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So let's learn from each other. All right. Well, that's about it. So, like I said, go ahead and comment, and we'll see you in the field. Thanks. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArcPodcast, or you can tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.